Welcome back to Julie's Village. I'm glad you're here. This episode is going to continue on with the series of episodes about academic skills, especially those basic skills and things to be aware of and ideas for if there are any areas in which you have concerns for your child. So, this next skill, continuing on with basic reading skills, is phonological awareness. The last video was about concepts of print, which is all about noticing print and the environment around us and understanding those basic concepts of a book. This next skill, phonological awareness, focuses on the ability to hear sounds correctly, to hear those individual words, and then to hear individual sounds within words. This is a really important skill in helping with later fluency and also spelling abilities. If students or children are having difficulty hearing sounds and words correctly, they are going to struggle with being able to pronounce words correctly, recognizing when they're reading if they've said a word correctly or incorrectly, and then again that ability to spell words correctly, to break words apart into their individual sounds, recognize those sounds, and then spell those sounds correctly. So, some things that you can be aware of are, first of all, just noticing it, just doing some basic things with sentences and helping them to understand that sentences are made up of individual words. You might say a small sentence like, I love you, and ask them if they know how many words are in that sentence. If they are very young, if they are preschool age, that's when they're just barely maybe going to be able to start pulling apart those sentences into the individual words and hearing those individual words. So, about that time is when you might start playing around with this, right around that preschool, beginning of kindergarten stage. That's when we would expect children to start be developing this skill. So, those are things that you can do, is just asking those simple questions. If they are struggling with it, you can start playing games with that. You could have them toss a ball back and forth with you or something like that, making up a sentence, only being able to say one word at a time as they throw the ball back and forth. So you can make up some silly sentences as they throw the ball to you. You say a word, you throw it back, they add a word. You can use counters and say a sentence and have them count or move one counter per word that you say. You can challenge them to come up with a 3-word sentence, then a 4-word sentence, then a 5-word sentence. Those are all things that you can do to play around. At this point, you don't really want to do a lot with written language. I wouldn't say avoid it altogether. It's always great to be in a language and a written language rich environment. That is so helpful with for later on reading skills. But for these type of activities, you're just really wanting to see, can they hear? Specifically, you're looking at that hearing piece. And so when you introduce that, the written language, books and things like that, then you're assessing a different skill. You're looking at it, they're bringing in multiple senses, and that can impact what you're seeing. So just keeping it to that, just the verbal and the auditory, you're just going to say these sentences and these activities. So the next part is breaking down even farther the individual sounds within words. You can do the same type of games, tossing balls, any kind of turn-taking games you can play with these sounds. For instance, even just rolling a dice. Maybe your child really enjoys board games, but before they can take their turn and roll the dice, Maybe they have to say a sound. You can use counters again and have them move counters for the number of sounds that they hear in words. So an example here might be cat, breaking apart the word cat into its individual sounds. Can they hear k, a, t? And there's two different things here. You want them to be able to put words back together after you break them apart, and then also you giving them a word and having them break it apart. I've heard of families doing this while they're driving and just playing this game as they're driving. Okay, I'm going to say sounds and you tell me what word I'm saying. And they might say something like fish. Now, I use that example because while fish has 4 letters, it only has 3 sounds. At this point, you're not worried about them breaking or knowing that that last sound is made up of 2 letters. You just want to know, can they hear it? Do they hear the sounds? Are they able to put those sounds back together? So you might start again by you breaking apart the word and they put it back together. And then later on, you turn it and say, okay, fish. How many sounds do you hear in fish? And then they need to break it apart into fish. You, again, any kind of turn taking you can do, tossing a ball, putting on parts of a picture. You could be drawing simple pictures together. You can just, if they can maintain the intention, the game itself can just be the sounds, putting together the sounds or pulling apart the sounds. From there, then you want to start working on manipulating those sounds. So that is segmenting the sounds, first of all, which is hearing the different sounds individually. For instance, with fish again, the f, I, sh. Then you want to start isolating what is the first sound you hear and helping them to recognize f is the first sound. Then working on, oftentimes they find it's easier to do the end sound, the beginning sound first, working on that till they've really got it. Then working on the end sound, and then working on the middle sound. I would often do this again with a ball. I would often use a ball or bubbles, having them blow the bubbles after they can do the activity. I would say a word that started with a sound, and then I wanted them to give me a word that started with the same sound. For instance, if I said sun and then they say star, then they get to blow the bubbles or they get to toss the ball. And then we would do the same once I saw they were getting that consistently. Then we would go to the middle sound. I wanted them to give me a word that had the same middle sound. For instance, if I said cup, then could they say sun, or a word that also has that sound in the middle? And then finally ending with that, working on those, or sorry, I would often do the first sound, then play the games with the last sound, and then play those same type of games with the middle sound. Right along with that, you want to help them to be able to recognize and create rhymes. That's a big part of this, hearing that ending sound. They're going to hear the last vowel and the last consonant sounds in a word. For instance, you want them to be able to hear maybe sun and run, hearing the UN sound, the un sound in both words. Rhyming, there's so many activities out there with rhyming. There are games online, there are silly songs that kids really enjoy, that the more familiar they get with these songs and hearing those sounds, the better they are at recognizing them and then starting to create them. One song that you might be familiar with is the Willoughby Wallaby song, where they say, Willoughby Wallaby woo, an elephant sat on you. Willoughby Wallaby wuss, an elephant sat on us. And then you're playing with that first sound, but you're also playing with those rhyming sounds. They're getting those. And then the song ends with, Willoughby Wallaby Woolly, an elephant sat on Julie. And you can play that with friends' names, you can play it with your family names, whatever comes to mind, their favorite TV show. Those will it's silly, but again, it helps them to start to hear those initial sounds, the w sound, and then they can start playing with those rhyming sounds. The next thing that you want them to be able to do is to make changes to words. So, for instance, you might say fish. Now change the f sound to d. What word do you have? And having them be able to say dish. You changed fish to dish by changing that first sound. And once again, you can do it with those ending sounds, and you can do it with the middle sounds. For instance, you could say, what if I changed in dish the sound to ah? Then do they understand that the word changes to dash? Then you might continue on again with those ending sounds. You might change that last sound to n. Now change sh to n. Now it's not dash, it's Dan. Those are, again, games that you can play just in isolation through that game, or you can give them a sound and then they have to make a sound, or then they give you a sound and you have to change the word. It doesn't have to be real words, it can be real words. This is just getting them playing with sounds and recognizing sounds. Oftentimes with dyslexia, or all the time with dyslexia, actually, there is a disconnect between what they hear and what they see written on the paper. So their ability to connect what they see with what they hear is a big part of helping with dyslexia. So if whether your child has dyslexia or not, these are basic building block skills. If they do have dyslexia, even at a young age, before it's identified and before it's even known, working on these skills is going to help them significantly when they start reading to be more successful with reading, because this hearing sounds part is a really big part of hearing, and then being able to hearing the sounds correctly so that they can say the sounds correctly and recognize the sounds correctly. If your child is struggling with reading, if they are school age, sometimes people tend to jump right to fluency and working on fluency. But this is an important part to assess if they are a slower reader or a struggling reader. One of the first places that you want to start and encourage the school team to start is making sure that they are hearing those sounds correctly. If your child does have dyslexia, then again, this part can't be skipped. They need to hear it. And even if they are in an older grade or farther along in school, you would still want this piece to be addressed. Even though, like I talked about at the beginning, this is something that you would first start working on in preschool and kindergarten, those early reading years. They are such important foundational skills that you don't want to skip past them if your child is struggling. Again, I would highly recommend that you be working on these skills and that you ask the school team to assess and work on these skills to make sure that there isn't a hole there that is impacting their ability to be a fluent reader. If you have any other thoughts of phonological awareness activities or questions, I invite you to leave that in the comments. If you have questions or suggestions or recommendations for people to have on in interviews in future episodes, I invite you to leave that in the comments. If this information has been or is helpful to you, I invite you to like, share, subscribe. That helps make this information more accessible to others who might need it. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your village.